colleague Michael Fuchs, and then spent many years training students and new practitioners. Hundreds, maybe thousands of patients over the years were healed by you. Tens of students went further to help even more people through your training courses. All these healed souls are with you today, accompanying you on your journey. In the 1960s, that often neglected giant who rescued Anglo-Jewry mainstream orthodoxy from drifting into conservative Judaism, Rabbi Brody, Zichron Livracha, persuaded you to join what was then called the Jewish Marriage Education Council, or JMEC. JMEC, JMEC, JMEC. It rang so often in our ears as children. You and Daddy Zichron Livracha even wrote a chapter together in the book published by them on Jewish marriage. Through your efforts and endeavors, countless numbers of young people built Jewish homes which may never have been built without you. About Shifra and Pur Chazar relate, Vayas Lohem Botim, Botei Kuno, Botei Levaya. All of those Jewish families which you helped build are with you today, together with their children and grandchildren at Soif Kol HaDoros. In an era when Jewish education in general and Jewish day schools in particular were often regarded as a menace rather than a blessing, you became involved in Jewish education through the local Jewish day school, Keren. Many an evening was taken up on the phone, organizing and planning anything and everything to do with the school, be it new staff, parent-teacher relations, whatever. Education, education, education was your message to combat assimilation. You were there, Yocheved, standing up to community big shots who couldn't understand why 3 hours on Sunday morning wasn't enough to build a new generation of dedicated members of the community. Years later, those same big shots would concede that you were right. Through the vehicle of Jewish education, which you were so deeply involved in, your own local community was transformed, as you put it yourself, from one where there was barely 1 million of Arba Minim on Sukkot to one where the shul was not big enough for one group of people to do Hoshanas. And in one generation, those thousands of Jewish children and their own children and grandchildren are with you today on your ultimate journey. Paro's daughter brought Moshe Rabbeinu into her home. You, through your immense warm heart, brought in tens of Jewish students into your home for Shabbos. Some were our friends, others were friends of our younger cousins. Your Shabbos hospitality was legendary, and it was with young people in the main that you really saw your mission. You carried on with even greater strength long after we were both married and living in Eretz Yisrael. There was the family of an old friend of yours, married to a very distinguished conductor, who were very far removed from Shmiras HaMitzvahs. They came to us for second Seder night every year we were in London, about every 2 years. One of their teenage sons related to you many years later that he told his parents that when I grow up I want to make a Seder like that. He married a frum girl, built a frum home, and they became pillars of their community, in particular leading their community mikveh project. One of their sons has even spent many Shabbos with us. Yes, his father did make many Seders like that over the years. But your dedication to Jewish students didn't end with Shabbos hospitality and reached out further in supporting the Jewish Chaplaincy Board and others over the years. Standing with you today as a guard of honor, there are all the families you helped build through your Shabbos hospitality to those young people in their vulnerable student years. When your younger brother Aviezer was born, your mother suffered from ill health. As his sister, his Miriam, you, only 12 years old at the time, became his second mother. Later on in life, he related that he often came to you for Shabbos when at Carmel College, rather than going home to his parents. And in your concern for his Jewish education, you persuaded him to go to yeshiva in Montreux, where a good friend of yours had recently married the son of the Rosh Yeshiva. In Switzerland, you told him, you will be able to ski and play tennis. You may even learn something in the yeshiva. That powerhouse of Torah, Uncle Aviezer, was sent to yeshiva for a couple of years before going to Oxford by you. Thousands of people who came back to Yiddishkeit through his vast educational efforts are with you now. The Talmidim of one of Eretz Yisrael's biggest yeshivas Nasiras Chochmah, headed by your nephew, Harav Daniel Wolfson, are here as your guard of honor. That yeshiva would never have existed had you not cared for your little brother and his Jewish education. But teisatzav achoy soy merochoik l'de'or ma ye'oser loy. Moshe Rabbeinu's wife Tzipporah recognized the importance of her immediate family. You followed in her footsteps. After we, your children, were born, you didn't return to work until we were 3 years old, and then only part-time. Your family was always your priority, at all times. Never mind your career. That would have to wait until your children were old enough. We married and had families of our own, and you were always there, helping and guiding us. It goes without saying that you cared for their education, but not just that. You took our children with you on holidays in the summer. You often came to us, and we often came to you in that veritable institution of yours in London, 8 Linnell Drive. Your veritable tribe of children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren are traveling with you today. To Elisheva, who cared for Mummy on a day-to-day basis and took care of her every need. Words do not suffice to express our Hakoras HaTov. To our own children who gave up many a Shabbos to spend with Grandma, whether together with us or even on their own, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu repay you with success in the chinuch of your own family. Robin and Rinat never missed their Erev Shabbos phone call. Never. Our deepest gratitude goes to Ronit, who was so devoted to Mummy for years and years, right until last night. We could never have even dreamed of being blessed with a carer like Jeanette. Jeanette, you are the most wonderful person on earth for Mummy. You cared for her as if she was your own mother. You cajoled her into eating when she didn't really want to eat. You were gentle and kind. May God give you the strength to carry on caring for other people with such love and devotion. Slim and Livia looked after everything you needed in London with boundless love and affection. Finally, Chani, your nurse in your last days, was so helpful and patient with assisting and guiding us during this most difficult period. She told us Mummy was a fighter to the end, although we already knew that. Mummy, you were a fighter all your life. You fought for all those values that were so dear to you. You fought disability until it became too much even for you. And over the past few weeks, we saw how you fought with such tenacity. As you approached the Kisei HaKovod with your vast entourage of companion neshamas, may you be a Melitz Yosher for all your family, and indeed for the whole of Klal Yisrael.
You were there together with Daddy, the vanished spark of the love, the width and breadth of a world, of a life. And what a life! It's hard to know where to begin, so rich and so full, and such an inspiration. You were creative in 101 different ways, and driven with a mission to help others. I feel I can hardly do you justice. A trailblazer in your profession, as a woman studying medicine against all odds, almost 40 years ago. Active in the early stages of group therapy and showing others could also benefit, spreading what you believed in far afield. You connected with people in all aspects of life, seeing people as they were, and as they are, and whoever they are, and being there for them, and in the way that they needed, concerned, listening, supportive, sharing so generously, and often no one would know. You always did what you thought was right and stood up courageously for your beliefs. and you were honest. And you let us do what we believed in. I know it was hard for you when I came and I left, but you never said a word. And you wrote me long letters every single week, never missing. And Mummy, you were always so busy, and you put your heart into everything you did, 100%. I don't know how you managed to do so much, and so well. Everything at home ran perfectly, to the tiniest detail. Your roast beef was just right, your barley mushroom soup delicious, but especially the dessert, which is what I always waited for, the beautiful Shabbat table, the flowers in the garden you left to rain, and so many visitors, such as the couple of you. And on top of all of that, you were so interested in everything, traveling to new places at all ages, music and art, and sharing your love of the world and of people, with Michal, with me, and with the grandchildren you loved so much. I especially want to thank Janet and Ronnie for your help. Thank you for all your care and your love. And Mummy, we're with you here to accompany on your way to Olam Haemet, Olam Shefulot Tov, where you're going to meet Daddy and your beloved sister. עוד תעזר לבושה ותשחק ליום אחרון, היא הפתחה בחוכמה, בתורת חפץ על זה.
Suppose English was the order of the day. The first thing I have to say is that Michael, his wife, Elisheva, family couldn't have been better children in these difficult last years. Can't be too long Erev Shabbos. The truth is that Michael encompassed the world with what he spoke. I also remember my surrogate mother, and not completely joking, I also remember when I was little, if I was naughty, I could expect to be punished by three mothers. And my mother wasn't always well, and by your mother, and by Rini. Vivienne fought for what she wanted to do, for what she wanted to be. I still remember some of the difficult battles with my father, Levaya, the generation who couldn't come to terms, couldn't understand that a woman could have the top of any profession. And I remind myself that during the war, there was an occasion where my father came back, I think from Manchester to London. They were still running their business, and the train was blocked for hours and hours on the route, almost days, because of bombing. And when he arrived home, he had pneumonia. Pneumonia in those days was a killer. There weren't any current antibiotics. Penicillin was experimental. I remember the Vivienne mobilized a friend of hers in the hospital where she was a student doctor. And I remember that they somehow or other got their hands illegally on some penicillin and brought it home. And they gave it to my father. There were no antibiotics in those days. The Germans had no experience with antibiotics. It was immediately successful. He was very, very ill, and within a few hours the situation changed. So she paid back all the fights about becoming a doctor. When she turned to psychiatry, I remember we used to joke. We used to say that anything he could do, she could do better. She wasn't better. They were very different. They were in different areas. But they were both at the top. That was not her motive. Her motive was that she needed to help people. She needed to help those people who were unable to extract themselves from the depths of pain. Erev Shabbos, I put in absolute prayer. With that, she was always with the Yiddish expression, Pflichtsmensch. It doesn't translate well. Someone who always does what has to be done. I recall when Anneke and I were engaged, we were invited to Vivienne with Anneke's mother, Levaya. And Michal wasn't there yet. We'll see in a moment why he wasn't there yet. She went through the meal, gave everything perfectly. Everything was always perfect. Hachnasa Sofrim had to be perfect. And kept on looking at her watch. Was wondering what this was. It wasn't her custom to look at the watch. And when we just about finished the dessert, she says, can't remember the exact expression, but she says, well, you'll have to excuse me, but it's time for me to go to the hospital. That was when you arrived on Michal. I think anybody else would have gone at the beginning of the meal and said, sorry, I can't be here. I can't be your host today. What had to be done, he did. It's not the act, it's the way of living. And she cared so much for her patients. She could make herself ill from caring. So I would like to finish with something of a prayer. Torah tells us, "V'olachta midracho," to walk in the ways of God. Zeh keli v'anveyu, the Gemara says, "Hevedoimelo." He says, "My God, try to be similar to him. Mahu chanun v'rachum, afato chanun v'rachum." I add, Mahu harofe lishpurei lev, just as he heals those whose hearts are broken. Umechabesh latzveisom, and difficult to translate. He bandages their pain. So you must care about people. You must be a rofer l'shpurei lev, a doctor for people whose lives are broken. Umechabesh latzveisom, to bind up their wounds, to somehow care about their lives being put on a normal basis insofar as possible. She really cared. It was not a profession. It was a Hebrew word difficult to translate. Ichpatiut. She really cared. So my prayer would be to the Almighty, none of us are perfect. But she followed your ways. She really cared about people. We pray the Almighty should care about her. Travel safely. None of us will forget him.
Growing up, there were two understoods. The first one was that my parents would be traveling from time to time. And the second one was that when they traveled, we would be going to Little Drive for Shabbos. So many beautiful Shabboses, unforgettable Shabboses, delicious food, off-key zmiras. There was never any question. I remember when I was a small boy and I got sick, from time to time, whenever I was home, Auntie Viv would come by with a present, a game, a book, something to keep me occupied. Where did this all come from? It came from love. The love that existed between my mother and Auntie Viv was palpable. And after my father was nifter, it just grew stronger and stronger. It wasn't the love of an older sister, but rather it was the love of a sister who adored her sibling. 2 weeks ago, Renata and I were there, and she hadn't been communicating for a long time already. And we sat with her, and I wasn't sure whether she recognized who I was. Wasn't reacting to anything. And I picked up the photo on her mantelpiece of the 3 siblings of Auntie Viv, of Uncle Aviezer Shlita, and of my mother. And I showed her, I said, "This is my mother." And she became teary-eyed. The love never left. The love was always there. She would do anything for my mother. I remember once, my mother was in the process of trying to buy an apartment in Yerushalayim. And Auntie Viv and Uncle Sam came to visit. My mother was staying with us, so they came to us. And towards the end of the visit, Uncle Sam, in a joking fashion, told my mother that they would do whatever they needed in order to help with the apartment, except for buy it, except for pay for it. And then they left. And 2 minutes later, there was a knock at the door, and Uncle Sam walked back in. And he told my mother that Vivienne sent me back to say that if you want us to, we'll pay for it as well. That love that they had for each other, the love that Auntie Viv had for my mother, it spilled over onto us as well. The last wedding that we made a few years ago, Auntie Viv came. It was a whole production. Get her dressed, bring her out. It was pouring with rain that night. When they told me that she'd come and she'd arrived, I went to greet her and to thank her for coming. And she told me she wouldn't miss it for the world. I don't know how long it took to get her ready. I don't know how long it took till she was able to get into the where the wedding was. But for her, she wouldn't miss it for the world. We spoke every week. We saw each other often. Conversation always came around to her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren. She was so full of love for them, and so full of pride. What they were doing, where they'd been, the next generation excited her. And when I updated her about our simchas, she greeted the news with the same excitement. These last few years have been a continual lesson in Kibbutz Ein. Watching how Rav Michal and Elisheva looked after their mother. It was awe-inspiring. Schedules put on hold, plans rearranged, home life upended, all to give the best possible care and maximum attention that they could. And it was clear that it affected her. We were there a few days ago, and she looked so peaceful because she knew, she absolutely knew that she had children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who loved her and cared for her. I close my eyes. I can hear her saying, "Not bad," each time I asked her how she was. And if I close my eyes, I can see her enormous smile, full of love, full of warmth. She should continue to smile down on the beautiful family that she's left behind here. And the warmth of that smile should stay with us. Ad Bias Goel, Amen, Amen.
Standing in, speaking for the younger generation, the one Robin just mentioned, next generation, my brothers-in-law, cousins, sisters-in-law, and children. There's a character in Klal Yisrael, which was mentioned earlier, Yocheved. Chazal called her, she was born Bein HaChomos, between two periods, connecting the transition. As Dr. Yezer mentioned, Grandma was born to a generation which couldn't recognize the next period. But she also foresaw what happens when you release all rules. Grandma wouldn't want to attach herself to one of those things, as she said, about the modern day devices. Grandma, you were born Bein HaChomos, and you dreamed big, and you taught us all to dream and fulfill our dreams. Follow our passions, but recognize the rules. Don't go freestyle. Follow your individuality, but recognize where you came from. That's how you led your life. And the extended life you had after, the difficult extended life you had after Grandpa was nifter, continue to shine that light to us. You fought to shine that light to us. The Sforno highlights in this week's Tzedra how Levi's long life was described in the Torah in order to demonstrate how B'chayei hazakenim itukan inyan hadorot. As the elders live, they're able to guide and instruct later generations. And they needed a Yocheved to facilitate that. As a Chaya, as a Vivienne full of life, you infused life into others, but Chayena Sayiladim. You looked at the next generation. You looked at those who had no one else to assist them. If I tried to engage you in an intellectual discussion about your profession, you refused. The pain was so acute, you understood them. And you didn't want to talk to them about as a subject matter. This was an issue that had to be dealt with, and if it's lemaisa, then we act upon it. It's not something which we can discuss, as they say in the Welterreich. You can't theoretically discuss it. It has to be applied, and it has to be acted. As Uncle Aviezer said, Heve doimeloi. We don't discuss patience as theoretical issues. Your connection to your grandchildren and great-grandchildren was so immense that amongst the most beautiful works of art you had in your house, you would hang their handiwork as well. You'd call it abstract art, you'd call it very interesting names to make them feel respected in what they're doing, and you'd hang it in your home. Your kitchen is full of it, whether in Israel or in London. These remnants are decades old. They're curling and fraying at the edges, but they're hanging there respectfully amongst all the other beautiful works of art you have at home. That's how you value your grandchildren. We'd bring you something from pool pottery and you'd marvel at it like it was the biggest work of art. We named one of our daughters Rini. And you loved it tremendously, and it was reciprocal. We spent with you Pashas Vayechi. It was 2 weeks ago, 2 short weeks ago. And Rini sat with you for another half an hour, going through photos of Auntie Rini. And you were teary-eyed. You reacted the whole suda. You could have been withdrawn, but when it came to Auntie Rini and interacting with our daughter Rini, the barriers broke loose. Love was tangible. This is the lesson you leave for us as that new generation, Grandma. We're holding on to our heritage wherever we are. And we're living our dreams to the fullest extent. That's how you lived your life. And that's how you guided us. And this has to be done with complete honesty, which you so embodied. I remember taking you once on a Friday Erev Shabbos, on a snowy Erev Shabbos from Smuts to Mitzpeh Nevo. It was a difficult journey, navigating snowy roads in Yerushalayim and getting you in time for Shabbos. And you thanked me profusely at the end of that drive for taking you. And I said, Grandma, it was my pleasure. And she said, no, it wasn't. If it's not your pleasure, don't say so. You did it because that's what you had to do. And I appreciate that. Thank you. And that was so you, Grandma. You wouldn't butter up the compliments. You tell it as it is. And that's what we needed to hear as your grandchildren. You were there for my smicha ceremony, Grandma. You were there throughout the entire journey. How are your studies? Supportive from every angle. And you did the same for everyone else. As your grandchildren, representative of your grandchildren, we ask mechila for the way if we have mistreated you, but you had definitely set us up in an educated manner and a guided manner to live our dreams the fullest.